Nature has always been really good at inventing new ways to kill things. Claws, fangs, stingers, venom. Sure, those are classics, but every so often, evolution gets a little drunk at the wheel and decides to experiment. And buried in the fossil record are weapons so bizarre, so over-engineered, that they look less like biology and more like a 12-year-old's doodle in the margins of their math homework. And yet, they weren't only real, they worked. So today, let's go through the strangest prehistoric murder weapons you've never heard of. And trust me, some of these make a T-Rex look like it was playing on easy mode. Ankylosaurus, the living tank. First up is the Ankylosaurus, aka proof that nature occasionally just said, what if we built a tank? This dino was covered head to tail in bony armor plates and spikes, but the main attraction was its tail, which ended in a solid bone club the size of a bowling ball. Fossil reconstructions show that a full-grown Ankylosaurus could swing that club with enough force to break a T-Rex's shin bone in a single hit. Think about that. The deadliest predator of its age could have been taken out by the dino equivalent of getting kneecapped with a baseball bat. And in case that doesn't sound scary enough, paleontologists ran computer simulations and discovered the impact force was equivalent to 370 professional baseball players swinging at once. So basically, if Babe Ruth met Jurassic Park. And the best part? Ankylosaurus wasn't even hunting. It was an herbivore. That's right. This thing had a medieval warhammer strapped to its butt, just for defense. The Thagomizer, cartoon murder becomes real. Now, if tail clubs weren't wild enough, let's talk about the Stegosaurus' tail spikes, also known as the Thagomizer. And yes, paleontologists literally stole the name from a cartoon. Back in the 80s, a Far Side comic described the spikes as the Thagomizer, named after the late Thag Simmons. And scientists were like, yeah, actually that works. So the name stuck, but don't let the joke fool you. The Thagomizer was a serious business. We've got Allosaurus fossils with deep puncture wounds that match perfectly with those spikes. In other words, one unlucky predator went in for dinner and came out looking like it had lost a jousting tournament. And when you remember that each of those spikes could be 3 feet long and swung like a medieval halberd, you start to realize the Thagomizer wasn't a cute dinosaur accessory. It was a full-on biological impalement machine. Therizinosaurus Edward Scissorhands goes vegan. Now we move from tail weapons to hand weapons. Meet Therizinosaurus, the Edward Scissorhands of the Cretaceous. This walking feather duster had claws over 3 feet long. That's longer than your arm. Each one was curved into a perfect sickle shape. Now here's the twist. Despite looking like the ultimate horror movie monster, Therizinosaurus was a herbivore. Scientists think it used its claws for stripping plants off trees, kind of like a giant salad fork. So basically, evolution designed the most terrifying claws in history and gave them to a vegetarian. That's like giving Jason Voorhees a spatula. Still, if you were a predator, you definitely wouldn't want to test whether those claws only worked on plants, because salad fork or not, they could shred through flesh just fine. The nose blades, Rhinorex and Gryposaurus. Sometimes weapons weren't built for stabbing or smashing, and sometimes they were just weird flexes, literally. Take Rhinorex and Gryposaurus, duck-billed dinosaurs that came with bizarre nasal crests. Some were shaped like giant blades, others like curved Roman helmets. Scientists still aren't entirely sure what they were for. Maybe combat, maybe mating displays, maybe just to look intimidating. But either way, they were basically dinosaurs running around with spoilers strapped to their faces. And considering that the bones inside were full of air chambers, some paleontologists think they may have doubled as sound amplifiers, letting them honk like prehistoric trumpets. So picture this, you're in the late Cretaceous, and a 10-ton nose-sword goose is blaring trumpet noises at you while waving its faceblade around. Deadly? Maybe. Absurd? Absolutely. The spear-faced pterosaurs. Now let's leave the ground and talk about weapons of the air, specifically the Ajdarchud pterosaurs. These were the largest flying animals of all time. Some stood taller than a giraffe when they landed, and they weren't dainty. They had long, stiff necks and heads the size of a grown man, ending in sharp spear-like beaks. Think of them as a flying giraffe crossed with a stork, crossed with a medieval lance. And unlike most pterosaurs that fished, Ajdarchids probably hunted on land, stalking smaller dinosaurs and jabbing them to death like oversized herons. Which, let's be real, is way scarier than being eaten by a fish eater. At least fish don't chase you across open ground with wings. Dunkleosteus, the prehistoric guillotine. Okay, time to leave dinosaurs behind and dive into the oceans. Because honestly, if you thought land animals were weird, prehistoric seas were basically an arms expo. Take Ankylosaurus. This was a fish the size of a bus, with jaws that worked like a guillotine. It didn't have teeth, it had bony plates that slammed together with enough force to slice through armored prey like butter. How much force? Scientists estimate over 8,000 pounds per square inch. That's stronger than a modern crocodile bite. Which means that if Ankylosaurus decided to take a nibble out of you, you'd basically be bisected instantly. So yeah, be glad these guys died out 360 million years ago. Helicoprian's buzzsaw jaw. Speaking of ocean nightmares, here's my personal favorite, Helicoprian. Imagine a shark. Now replace its lower jaw with a literal buzzsaw made out of teeth. That's Helicoprian. For decades, paleontologists had no idea how to reconstruct this animal. At first, they thought the buzzsaw was on its nose. Then they thought it was coiled up inside its throat. Turns out it was in the lower jaw. A spiral of constantly regenerating teeth that rotated forward like a conveyor belt of death. So basically, a shark with a built-in table saw. I don't care what evolution was going for here, but 10 out of 10 for nightmare fuel. Glyptodon, the armadillo tank. On land, mammals were busy building their own murder weapons. Case in point, the Glyptodon. Picture an SUV-sized armadillo with a shell thicker than concrete and a tail tipped with a giant mace. Fossils show that Glyptodons use those tails in combat. We've found cracked shells that line up perfectly with tail club strikes. So these guys weren't just tanks. They were tanks with wrecking balls attached. And if you were another Glyptodon, your biggest threat wasn't a predator. It was your neighbor pulling a drive-by tail swing. Bonus round, other prehistoric oddities. Quickfire round because prehistoric Earth was basically running a biological arms race. Stegosaurus, a shark with an anvil-shaped dorsal fin covered in teeth. Looks like it had a hairbrush on its back. Scientists think it was for display, but honestly, I wouldn't put it past them to headbutt things with it. Mamenchisaurus neck, not a weapon per se, but with a 30-foot-long neck, it could probably whip predators just by accident. Elasmotherium horn, a woolly rhino relative with a horn so huge it may have been 6 feet long, basically a unicorn, if unicorns could impale mammoths. And here's the thing, half of these weapons weren't even made for killing. Some were for defense, some for mating, some maybe just for showing off. But that's the beauty of evolution. It doesn't design things to be pretty or logical, it designs whatever works. And sometimes, what works is a tail club that can break bones, or a buzzsaw made of teeth, or a shark with a literal anvil growing out of its back. So the next time you look at a rhino horn, or a porcupine quill, or even a goose with its unholy teeth, just remember, you're looking at the family-friendly version, because millions of years ago, the arms race of life wasn't just survival of the fittest, it was survival of the weirdest. At least you don't live in a world where every other animal has a built-in mace, spear, or power tool for a face. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay weird.